I've never been a Fujifilm user. Since I started making videos and taking photos in 2015, I've only ever used Sony cameras, and it's my comfort zone to stay there. I have lenses, I know the ins and outs, and I know I can get good results. So for another company to shift my gaze would have to take something special, and Fuji have done it. This is the first time I've used a camera that's felt alive. Welcome back to Byte Review. This is my review of the Fujifilm X-T3. To be clear, I did reach out to Fujifilm for this review unit, and they were kind enough to lend it to me for 2 weeks. I also had the pleasure of using the 56mm f1.2 and the 18-55 f2.8, which are both fantastic lenses. Build-wise, the X-T3 is great. I know a lot of people were concerned about Fujifilm moving production from Japan to China, but you really should put your mind at rest over that. All the buttons, dials and switches all felt tactile and clicky. I didn't notice any mushiness to the buttons at all. There's custom buttons all over the X-T3 as well, which are crazy useful once you're into the system, but it's not something I explored that much over my time with it. There is one thing which I wish it did have, which is a fully articulating screen, something like a Canon or a Panasonic camera. Fuji does have a strange compromise where the screen flips upwards and outwards so you can shoot down below or up high, but it's not quite as good as a fully articulating screen, and it feels somewhat over-engineered. If you're coming from a DSLR, this is going to feel like a small camera. It is mirrorless after all, and because of the nature of the system, it is just that bit smaller. There's nowhere for your pinky to rest, for instance, and you might feel a little cramped initially. However, this is a really nice camera to use, and it's fun to shoot with, which is really important. I mentioned in my last video on the X-T3 that I found the controls a little tricky to get my head round to, as I'm so used to flicking between modes within a menu. However, after a few more days of the X-T3, it all came together in a really nice way. I became fast at changing things to how I needed them, and no longer felt like I was searching for settings. As a YouTube guy and general video geek, I'm going to start the review there, as it is just as important to me as the photography side. But I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of specs. I'd rather just talk about my experience shooting with it, and in short, I absolutely loved it. Footage from the X-T3 is detailed, sharp and punchy, and the fact that it can shoot all the way up to 60p at 4K is just stunning. Only a few cameras out there can compete with that, and it's such a good video feature for the X-T3 to have. What impressed me the most though, and this will be a bit of a reoccurring theme in this review, is just how nice the colours were. I'm so used to heavily grading my Sony footage that I was genuinely shocked when I saw what was coming out of the X-T3. I mainly shot in the Fuji log profile while I was using the camera, which was easy to expose and shoot with, and it graded just so easily. A few of these things you're seeing now are literally just one click in Premiere Pro, and to get footage looking this good, this easily, was just really nice to see. I'm trying my best to not gush too much because colour is subjective at the end of the day, but I really liked it. Fuji have a range of film simulations built in too, but the Eterna one for film is particularly good. If you're not really into colour grading, it's something you can use directly out of camera. It's got a nice soft cinematic feel to it, and there is space for you to colour grade in there too, but you really don't need to because it just looks so good. Another great video feature is the slow motion, which is built into the camera. The Fujifilm X-T3 can shoot up to 120 frames in 1080p, and the resulting footage out of it is again really nice. It's a lot more detailed and sharp than what my Sony currently produces. Sometimes you can really watch the quality dip, but it's not so much in the X-T3. There of course is a slight crop when you're using this mode too, but it's not a huge deal. Footage is slowed down in camera too, so you don't have to do any post-processing to get your footage looking slow, which again is just nice to have. As ever, nothing is perfect, and for all the amazing video features of the X-T3, there is one caveat, and that is the lack of the inbuilt stabilization, or IBIS. While I was over the moon with how the footage was looking in a colour and quality sense, pretty much everything I shot handheld was shaky. And yes, I know there's a million ways to minimize this, such as to use a gimbal or to use the warp stabilizer in post, but for any normal handheld shots, you just can't escape that horrible little shake, which in my eyes really takes away from the look. There is an obvious answer to that. I could use lenses with optical image stabilization built in, but that's not really an option for me, and it brings me to my second kind of complaint, I guess, with the X-T3, and that is a lack of prime lenses with OIS built in. I pretty much only shoot with prime lenses, and as far as I can see, Fujifilm only have one prime lens which has OIS built in, and it's not really what you'd call a standard prime, so I really can't see myself going for that one. I feel a bit silly because when I used the X-T3 for a day, I did use the kit lens on it, which is the 18-55 f2 to f4, which was a really nice lens, and it has OIS built in. So for all of that day, I didn't really notice any shakiness, and I was pretty much sold on getting an X-T3. However, if I place the two clips side by side, one with the stabilized lens and one of the prime lenses, the difference really is obvious. Fuji actually has an excellent array of zoom lenses with optical stabilization built in, so if you shoot with zoom lenses, you'll pretty much be fine, but for a prime shooter like me, it's just an issue I really can't get past. In hindsight, I was silly to not ask for a lens which does have stabilization built in. The 50-140 f2.8 really comes to mind as it covers a load of my needs and does have that stabilization built in. I know what you're probably all currently thinking, if video is so important to you, then why don't you go for the XH1, which has got stabilization built into the camera so all the prime lenses will work stabilized? Well, it's the 4K 60 and the advanced autofocus and all those things from the X-T3 is the things I really appreciate, and when I'm looking to buy a new camera, I don't really want to compromise on the specs, which I'll know I'll end up using a lot, regardless of how well suited that older camera might well have been. If this was all based on photos, I'll be sitting here with an X-T3 and be telling you why I bought the X-T3. Shooting on this thing was an absolute blast. The autofocus was lightning quick, especially on the 18-55 f2.8. It locked on. Things like eye tracking autofocus and subject tracking was just really good in general. I can't see anyone having any real issues with the autofocus on the X-T3, as long as you've got a lens that can keep up. The 56mm f1.2 was a little slower, and I think a couple other lenses out there are notorious for being slow, but all the newer XF lenses are super quick, and I was really impressed with that. I hate to continually bang on about the colour, but the photos again is another area where I was blown away by what the X-T3 was producing. The photos in my eyes kind of look edited already, and not in like a colour pop horrible portrait mode which some cameras have, but in an artful kind of tasteful manner, which was just so nice to see. The X-T3 has a wide range of film simulation modes, and they're all really nice. The one I kind of fell on and used the most though was the classic chrome, which has this kind of soft cinematic look to it, which was really nice. A few touches in Lightroom really brings out the colour from these photos too, and I was kind of annoying my friends constantly by pointing at the back of the camera and saying, look at that, it looks edited already, and I'm sure I was a total nuisance for those days, but I was genuinely very impressed. Again, I'm trying not to gush too much because I know colour is subjective, but Fujifilm had me there with those photos. Of course, a lot of this comes down to how good the lenses were, and the ones that I got from Fuji were nothing short of fantastic. The 56mm f1.2 especially blew me away, and I must admit I pretty much only ended up using that one during my whole time testing it. So it's probably fair to say that the X-T3 for my style of photography was absolutely brilliant, and I really struggled to pick a flaw with it. Like I said, if I was just doing it for photography, I would already have it, and that says a lot in itself. To sum up this review as best I can, I would purchase the X-T3 in a heartbeat if there was a better selection of OIS primes. But as far as I can see for now, the selection just isn't there. And that's a real big deal for me. As I mentioned, the XH1 does solve all those issues with inbuilt stabilization, but it's missing those other features that I'd really want to get if I was going to dive into a new camera system. It all leads back round to this one thing: no camera is perfect, so you've got to pick the one that works best for you and work around its shortcomings as best you can. Unfortunately, I can't work around not having some form of stabilization for how I shoot videos. That might be totally different for you. You might have a gimbal, or you might have some other way of shooting which helps you, but for me, it really is a deal breaker. It might sound kind of lame for me to say this, but it's very rare to fall in love with a product you know isn't right for you. Despite the excellent pricing, I doubt I'll be picking up a Fujifilm X-T3. And when the time comes for me to make that next purchase, I know I'll be thinking about it all the time. It is, in my eyes at least, the undisputed king of APS-C cameras, and I'll be waiting with bated breath for the Fujifilm X-H2.